Second day of this coming inquiry related to land adjacent to Plantation. So we got through the bulk of the planned sessions yesterday, so we just remain to go through the draft list of conditions and the draft legal agreement. Before I push on with that, is there any matters or anything that either of the parties want to raise? No. Okay. So I propose to tackle conditions first of all, and I'll go through the schedulers in the statement of common ground and just pick out comments where I have them. So without further ado, so condition one, this was the time limit condition that we touched upon at a couple of points yesterday. I didn't know whether the appellant's going to have a chance to give any consideration in terms of time limit specific to zone one more than anything.
We did so. We were sort of trying to second guess what your actual concern was and the reason behind what you were concerned about, if there was a concern. I mean, effectively, that condition looks slightly different to the normal conditions, the standard time limit condition, but it was one that Mr. Callis and I spoke about. We obviously want to get on and do the development, and the time limit is split into two elements, one for zone one and then one for zones 2 and 3. And this time limit for zone one is the standard time limits. Reserve access within 3 years. It just gives a little bit more flexibility for a little bit more extra time on phases 2 and 3, just in terms of the scale of the development, complexity of the project, and responding to market needs, etc. So that's why it was doing that. It wasn't doing anything more beyond that, but I think your question, you tell me if I'm wrong, sir, but your question was about potentially noting that the transport assessment had an opening year assessment that was 2026, and assumptions have been made about that in the assessment of the traffic implications for the development, and therefore would it be appropriate to adjust some time limits to make sure that there was indeed some opening in 2026, and that is our expectation. It will be probably late on in 2026. It said it will be very far behind there. However, I don't think you necessarily need to worry about that, and the reason why I'm so
having considered it, the purpose of the opening year assessment is just to set a realistic date as to when first unit is likely to be occupied. It's simply to set a time frame for that assessment. But notwithstanding that, we've done a 2031 assessment with all the connected elements in, and ultimately that has led to West Northampton's sort of changing their position on the case because of the impact on the 2031 assessment. Therefore, whilst the 2026 assessment is a sort of basis for assessment on national highways network, we've also reached a position based on 2031 with a modal shift the impacts will be severe. Therefore, we don't feel that sort of any restriction committing us to sort of have occupations in 2026 is appropriate. But we obviously want to get on as quickly as possible to develop. That's simply a realistic time frame, which is set at the scoping stage of national highways as to when it's likely to be occupied.
I understand the position. Has the council got any comments to make?
No, I think we're fine with the 2031 assessments, and that the site in its own right does not have a severe adverse impact, providing no shift targets are achieved.
I'll just read the comments. That's fine. Okay. Condition 7. Again, one we touched on yesterday and it was specifically raised by Mr. Russell about the Briam. Very good. And his suggestion is an excellent standard has been achieved elsewhere. That was part of my question on condition 7. I was also wondering whether it were a compliance condition. I didn't know whether there would actually need to be any documentation submitted to provide evidence that the very good standard or excellent standard has been met. But I mean, perhaps concentrate on this excellent standard first of all. I didn't know whether any comments from the council as to whether it has been implemented elsewhere, if there was a policy basis to do that.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, so I think as was alluded to yesterday, the policy requirement is for very good, and that's set out in the joint course strategy, I believe. So there's no actual formal requirement for anything more than that. When we were dealing with the DHL application, I think the applicant or appellant in that instance sort of voluntarily said they would go above and beyond. But from the council's perspective, as long as the policy requirement is met, we wouldn't ask for anything further.
You would normally ask for documents to provide evidence that a very good standard has been met. So,
I mean, obviously the condition requires compliance. I think if the council felt that it hadn't been, it could request that as part of the sort of enforcement monitoring aspect. I don't necessarily feel there's a need to have all that sort of formal process signed off necessarily. Thank you.
No, I think that's helpful. I mean, I think the only thing I would say is that, as I said yesterday, was that Briam very good reflects policy position. So in terms of sort of justification for or a policy put to seek anything higher than that, I don't think that's there. But it's not necessarily that the appellant is bringing it down to a lower standard. I mean, in reality, as I said yesterday, I think Briam very good. Most of the building regs these days well exceed very good in any event. And although Briam is sort of mentioned here, it's not necessarily the case that all developments like this go through a Briam process. And that's why the actual condition says are an equivalent standard. Because there's EPC plus rating, for example, which this one is definitely going to go Briam for, which is a similar related standard, etc. So there is, it's just to say that's what the policy requires. We can tell with the condition, it's likely the department will probably exceed that, and certainly building regs will see through that as well.
So I just think, obviously the joint course strategy is 11 years old now, I think. So obviously there's a certain element of date within that policy. Except what the appellant says about building regs have advanced probably quite significantly since that. It's probably really about process condition, as it were, rather than something that we're rather than ambitional in that sense. Yeah, okay.
thank you. Condition 11, structural landscaping. I was wondering whether there certainly seems to be some overlap in terms of what's secured through the 106. And I was also wondering, is it necessary to go with securing landscaping details where landscaping is a reserved matter? But are there any initial thoughts on that, or perhaps describe the approach that's been taken in terms of landscaping detail being nailed down through the condition and through the 106?
Yeah, so, again, Mr. Kyson and myself had some detailed discussions in this, in terms of, as linking it as well to the sort of general development parameter plans. So there was a general intention to try and ensure that there was some, understanding of some structural strategic landscaping that would sort of encircle the development that would be beneficial for all the phases that would happen. And that would be potentially advanced to a slightly different time frame than maybe the individual phases. So it was trying to identify those and get structural landscaping in earlier, and it talks as well in this condition about a timetable for the delivery of that structural landscaping. The condition then goes on to talk about then the indicative landscaping, or the more indicative landscaping areas within the development zones that then would come forward as part of the reserve matters for each phase, effectively. So that was the sort of duality in the two elements, but they were seen to be very complementary in terms of the way in the approach. Yeah, the section 106 does talk about that in landscaping in some general terms, but it's more associated with strategic landscaping and general management associated with that, and insurance transfer to a management company, etc. Was sort of complementary to it.
Yes, so from the council's perspective, there isn't possibly admittedly an element of overlap, but the two intentions are to ensure that the structural landscaping is delivered early so that it can mature and become effective as soon as possible, which is a very similar approach to what was secured with the HL appeal. And then the purpose of the section 106 is primarily to deal with long-term management of that, such that the structural landscaping is maintained properly in perpetuity. There's an element of overlap in terms of, I think both require details and timetable, but working with the appellant, I think we felt that this was the most sort of pragmatic way of doing ensuring that early delivery.
And I'd say where it's referred to as strategic landscaping in the 106, structural landscaping and conditions, that's essentially the same thing.
Yes, I think it is. It's just different language. And obviously the purpose of the condition 11 is to clarify which areas are the structural landscaping to ensure that they're dealt with, separately to the areas of landscaping that are sort of within the zones, within the lots and parcels.
But those other areas of landscaping, sort of the details would come through anyway as a matter stage, as a need.
The residual areas, would certainly come through as a matter, but it's the focus, because landscaping is a reserved matter, but the intention was to formalise it and the expectations at an early stage that we would get that delivery, and therefore the effectiveness of that landscaping would be achieved as soon as possible.
Yeah, anything else to add?
I mean, I think understanding. I think the main point you're saying, sir, if I'm reading it right, is that a reserve matters is landscaping, and therefore why would you put a condition on requiring details of landscaping? So this condition one does that. Sometimes we see landscaping conditions that sort of say, like, the details pursuant to condition 1 in respect to landscaping shall include the following details. That sort of clarifies it, but it's the primary intent of the first condition to deal with landscaping. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it does provide some clarity in addition to matters, as opposed to being anything that should necessarily be overtly problematic for either party in understanding the permission. And it also does, as Mr. Kyle said, explain a little bit more about those different types of landscaping that's envisaged for the development.
Just one wording point to the first line, describes construction of any building above site level, all the matters for structural landscapes, and that's full detail of all structural landscapes on it.
I think in that aspect, we wanted to ensure that within that sort of structural landscaping zone, we had full reserve matters approved and therefore essentially a full consent. Admittedly, it would only be landscaping, there's not any buildings or any of the other reserve matters necessary to deal with, but it was the reason for that wording was to ensure that there was essentially a full consent within those zones, and therefore you could commence within those zones.
Right, if that's on board with.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's plural with the matters of them, I suppose it is plural, but, oh, yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, I think we're on board with that. I mean, the approach is that, you know, trying to ensure that there's an advanced submission or an early submission of those details for the structure and landscaping zones. I think sort of relatively plainly understood the wording, it sort of does that, I think.
We'll return to the specific wording with the 106 later on, but I'll look at that as soon as we go to the 11. We just check with condition 13, the site access. Prior to the commencement of any construction works, it's to be completed and open to traffic. I presume that's like in a fully finalised state with that, and is that in lieu of it providing, intended to provide access to the garden centre? Because normally you might find it might just be initial first line of course or something for the condition requiring it to be in a finalised state.
As I understood this one, and again, discussed, and I had some detailed discussions about this condition, in terms of the way it's constructed, because it's quite precise in terms of the way it says prior to commencement of the construction of any building. Basically, we'll get the site access and highway works for vehicle access into the site completed and available to use effectively. Whether that's a top binder course or I don't know, that might be too detailed for the discussion here, but it probably will be sufficient that the highway authority have signed it off that it can be used on the public highway effectively. So it's trying to do. So I think in a simple reading of it, it's trying to do that. What it's trying to, because we did have a conversation that said, well, right, really the site access is needed prior to the occupation of any building, not the construction of any building. But there was a concern about that mainly because there isn't really a suitable construction access really for the development until we get this access in as well. But given that the flexibility in it was probably the ability for us to do some groundworks and general drainage and laying out, but not get onto the buildings. See what I mean? So that's why there was quite a careful bit of thought about that between ourselves, even though it probably looks like it wasn't. But so it is not prior to occupation for construction reasons, and it's prior to any building to give us some flexibility about getting on and delivering this development sooner rather than later. Because we want to get on, as well as doing the construction access, we want to be doing our groundworks and getting our road infrastructure doing and our drainage infrastructure and all those things going before we can get onto the buildings.
Thanks, sir. So, yeah, essentially this condition is a mirror of condition 5 on the DHL decision, and both conditions were stipulated by National Highways, who actually originally had the same discussion of the DHL appeal. National Highways had stipulated that it was prior to any commencement of development. Obviously, and in both instances, the developer is, initially sought occupation. The council sees prior to construction of any building as a sort of happy middle ground with that, because it allows an element of flexibility for developers to do some initial works on the site, but it ensures that the formal access is available for use for construction of buildings, and all those materials being brought into site, whereas initial earthworks is primarily shifting around within the site, etc. So yeah, the requirements are basically the same as the DHL.
And just one other thing, just to point out on that again, in terms of the specific work in that condition. So it specifically highlights the scheme of works to create the highways accesses for vehicular traffic associated with that approved drawing. The bus stops and the other elements that are on there, including the footpath elements, are tied in under condition 15. So we've sort of separated them out, and that's helpful to us as well, because It's not sign off and 278 approach, sign offs for getting those works in the highway further down and open the site. Will take a little bit longer and it will allow us to get on quicker. But they are linked to occupation.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And again, so that's consistent with DHL condition 6, where the offsite works were done at a similar juncture, I think, so.
Let's come on to condition, but being very short. I don't know. I was just wondering, as it relates to offsite works, whether it might be more suitable or appropriate to have Grampian style for wording, that means no building shall be occupied until the bus stops and other offsite replaced cycleway improvements have been completed. Living in, achieving that.
That's more in a Grampian style. I think it has the same effect this way around, but I think things doing it more often the other way around. Which is, I don't have any objections to changing that.
I don't think the council would have any objection to it be changed. Again, I would just note that in condition 6 of the DHL decision, that's a prior to first occupation. It's written in that sense, but you know, exactly how it's structured isn't the point, is the trigger point of it.
Yeah, you're still saying it's prior to occupation, not just 50 grand, so it would be more traditional Grampian style.
Condition 17. Very minor point for the first line, no development to take place on each phase. This is consistency with our number of the conditions that the wordings reads more logically as each phase until the method statement for that phase has been intended to improve.
Yeah, that's fine, and again, that's consistent with the DHL decision.
I think also the title of that condition shouldn't be CEMP, it should be CMP.
Yes, well, just coming to that point, because obviously Mr. Russell yesterday.
Yeah.
You raised the CEMP being requested by National Highways. And I think it suggested that in their consultation response, they wanted consultation upon it as part of the wording, I guess. And we'll just figure it out to actually have a view on it.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've covered it off. I mean, just to forget, this doesn't have to be the same as the DHL decision. I mean, it's your decision, so it doesn't have to be the same. It's not a matter of saying that especially this you have to be the same. But in terms of the general approach to construction management, with specific regard to sensitivity of biodiversity, we've covered that in condition 18. So condition 18 is an ecological mitigation enhancement strategy specifically for the construction field.
You know, I think from our view of the DHL system, there's two CEMP conditions, one related to biodiversity and one related to
Construction generally.
much similarly. I think it covers pretty much similar points to what's raised.
Yes, exactly, and we've done the same thing. So we've got a construction management a method statement which deals with all general construction activity management, except for hours of construction, which is other than a separate condition at the end. And we've got a separate one that deals with construction management for ecology mitigation enhancement during the construction phase. So we've got two. There's just different words, different titles.
Was there any thought, just because of the point that was raised specifically about the National Highways response and then suggesting that they have a say or have consultation? Well, it's not necessarily normal practice in terms of conditions.
Well, conditions shouldn't normally refer to the consultee or give the consultee any status in approving the condition. The conditions have to be approved by the local planning commission. That's all effectively. So it doesn't need to reference the highway authorities. But in saying that, I fully expect that the council will probably consult with highways authorities anyway. So
We would routinely consult with relevant highway authority as well as other people like environmental health, etc. On any such conditions. So.
Just a minor point of condition 18, where after the different bullet points, no external lighting should be installed within the ecology mitigation and biodiversity enhancement areas. I wonder whether that should say biodiversity protection zones, as in that's what's clarified through part B of the condition. I'm not sure where or how they're clarified as ecology mitigation and biodiversity enhancement areas are. I don't know whether that may well be pinpointed somewhere in the documentation, but I don't know if everything thoughts.
I think that's helpful. It just avoids another type of area that we actually haven't defined anywhere else, does it? It reflects the conditions, so I think that's helpful.
Yeah, I think it's probably just a miswording what you know, I think it's say tightening up, I'm concerned about.
I mean, lighting's covered on a number of different occasions, and there's a little bit of duplication around lighting. We had the discussion around that. We sort of got to the point of thinking, well, let's see what your reaction was to the lighting references, but there's some referencing to lighting there and still the conditions on lighting.
Yeah, noticed, but. So I think I'm trying to cover some different matters. The surface water drainage conditions started 24. I've seen that emanated from the local flood authority's response. But just wanted to pick up essentially a couple of points that were raised by Mr. Russell. Climate change design parameters. I've seen that there's specific reference to climate change adjustments in the DHL surface water conditions. I've seen that in the drainage strategy, the flood risk and drainage strategy has been submitted. There is a allowances or consideration given to the standard 20-40% considerations or alterations. Is there any thoughts as to that matter and any potential suggested amendments that would need to be taken to the condition to ensure again consistency with the DHL decision?
I didn't really have anything to add to on that. I mean, you do see in these conditions, don't you, the specific reference to the percentage change for or allowance for climate change. But effectively, you know, this is requiring us to obviously prepare a detailed design and submit that detailed design to the council. So ultimately, the sign for the council is there. To be expected to comply with whatever their latest policy requirements are, which will include requirements for climate change. If we submitted a scheme that didn't have an allowance for climate change in it, I'm sure the council would be not prepared to discharge that condition with those details.
I generally would concur.
Yeah, similar points to what we've said about requiring consultation with national highways. Again, their condition requests it. I assume it would be the expectation that the council would include them in any consultation.
Yeah, certainly. So I think you know, if there were any discharge onto national highways, we would consult them as part of that process. You know, I think the way that the national highways condition wording is written is sort of, you know, in case there is. So yes, certainly if that were what the ultimate drainage scheme required, then we would consult with them as much as possible.
So you make a judgment on the basis of what it comes in.
Yeah,
it's big.
I mean, there is a reference in condition 24 to discharge into the strategic road network drainage system. The site is an uncontrolled, effectively discharge into the strategic road network drainage system as it stands at the moment. So it's although it's described as a departure from standard, it's not a new introduction into that system. And actually, fact, there's benefits going to come out of the system to manage that surface water into their network. So those discussions have already progressed with them, and there's a formal departure procedure that we'll need to go into to clear those arrangements.
I was just going to say part 4, the bullet point part 4, detailed scheme, the ownership schedule, maintenance, etc. That's secure on the focus of condition 26 on the detail. I don't think that necessarily a particular bullet point needs to be included in 24. Unless there's any additional
Point.
yeah. Yeah, about one sec.
Uh, 29, which is 29. Again, one that we touched on briefly yesterday. I assume the precise position is dependent on the detail of the DHL proposal. And that would have to be come through a sort of joined up fashion later down the line. Assume that's being will be picked up in due course. There's no need for any more precision in terms of the condition required.
Yeah, I don't think it needs any more detail at this stage. I mean, again, last opportunity for the councillors of planning for it's not just two things lined up, which hopefully they would do. I mean, essentially, it links to Stone 2 because that's where that connection would go. We know what the requirement is that we want to achieve. There's similar opportunities on the other side of the fence, so to speak. And if we apply for ours first and ours first goes in and it's dealt with, then the council can match it on the other side and vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, so we had obviously a similar approach to DHL. We kind of left it a bit loose at this stage so that we could ultimately decide where the best place was. I mean, all parties roughly know where the natural logical positions in general, but it's just a question of making sure that things actually line up when we get to reserve matter stage. Particularly with this site, I think, you know, with the DHL side of the fence, there's a lot more flexibility as to where that can be put in. But you know, just making sure it does ultimately align. We don't have part fence that are 4 or 5 minutes apart. A bit so.
There's anticipated with the DHL side that there's an east-west link process.
There is, yeah. So on the DHL side, the link would only be about 3 or 5 meters long to connect to that path that's going in anyway.
Condition 31, I don't have any issues necessarily with the condition itself, as it guards against any sort of scenario where there's no access to the garden centre. But I was wondering, is there a need to what to guard against 2 access points existing in perpetuity? So in a sense, I mean, there's no requirement for the existing garden centre access to be stopped up as far as I can see through this condition or any other condition. Whether the details of that stopping up might be sensible to secure, but that to be to occur within a specified time frame. You might see elsewhere we're removing a point of conflict in the highway. Very thought.
I mean, so there's provision in the access design indicatively for how that new garden centre access goes in. I assume possibly closing up of the existing access might be part of the section 6 discussion with national highways, so we don't end up with duplication. I don't necessarily feel that there's a need for a sort of firm deadline point in the condition. And obviously the requirement of petition 31 is it's also to ensure that there's then a suitable full way cycle way connection retained even once it's closed up. So it's just kind of securing that as well.
Yeah, I'm just linking back. So just to explain the sort of a little bit of wider context around this. So, so the intention is that the garden centre will have a new access into the garden centre from the access that we're creating onto the A5. The access plan that is an approved drawing does say, with regard to the existing 2 points of access that go to the garden centre, it says both existing Bell Plantation access to be stopped up as part of the site access works. So there is an anticipation that they would be stopped up as part of putting this access in. So that's the nature of the proposal that's on the drawing. And then just in terms of the access itself, the new access. So when it comes into the site, it obviously shows in detail the bell map, and then it's slightly ghosted in terms of the drawing that shows then the continuation of that road, and then a right-hand turn that goes then down to the garden centre. So, and that's described as indicative on-site layout of that road. So this condition was more associated with details of stopping up that existing access and how it's going to be left in the garden centre, etc., and be planting it up and maybe leaving the pedestrian access out. But also details of that new access that will come from the new access from the A5 to the garden centre, the top end of it. And in the garden centre, obviously, we can't park at that top end, so it will just come straight into that top end, can't happen. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. What we didn't necessarily want was for the garden centre access to be permanently stopped up and then some sort of proper and ready temporary access through to the garden centre or from the new access for a number of years. It was more to try and also sort of make sure that that's formalised and delivered rather than having some sort of temporary arrangement at the time.
Well, the passes consent to. There's obviously, where we're going with that. My comments on schedule, I just wanted to pick up on anything else that was raised by Mr. Russell, provided that list of various suggestions, which we've already covered in a number of instances. We just talk about a couple of conditions that were secured at DHL, which I assume was specific to that scheme, but whether there was any translation between that and this scheme. Related to refrigerated trailers and vehicle reversing bleepers. Is that related more? Is that something to consider on this side?
I think so with both are essentially a noise amenity consideration. With the DHL side, there are 3 private dwellings that are sort of relatively close to the boundary of that site, and therefore much closer proximity in terms of those sort of noise nuisances. The site here is more remote from any immediate adjacent dwelling. I think both would be very good practice. I think generally speaking, and the council wouldn't have any sort of objection to either being included, possibly vehicle reversing beepers. Those noises do tend to travel possibly a bit further than engine generator noise from a refrigerated trailer. So in some ways both would be good practice.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, the DHL scheme, well, to a significant extent, the DHL scheme is different to this scheme in terms of its scale, size, the size of their service yards. They're enormous, etc. It's got a different relationship to residential sectors than this site has got. So I mean, personally raised the point here. I'd like to know which properties he's specifically concerned are going to get affected by some of these sort of reversing vehicles from this site. So I don't think that I can't see the necessity in the same way. And obviously part of the DHL was in full, so it was a hybrid application. So and they knew who the occupier was and they could commit to all those different types of things, it's fine. But Mr. Carson and I talked about noise, and on a precautionary approach, we have got a noise commission, which requires a noise assessment to be set out prior to the occupation of any building, set out the likely impacts of any noise sensitive property, measures necessary to ensure noise does not unacceptably affect community residents. So potentially as part of that, you can continue all types of noise associated with the occupation of the employment building, which could be, noise within service yards and noise emanating from buildings. So I think it will get picked up at each point in time if it becomes sensitive. Indeed, if the council built something opposite or something like that, you could come around then, couldn't it, at that appropriate time in the unlikely events. But so I think that we are covered on it. So I don't think those extra conditions need adding in. I think we've got covered anyway.
Yeah, no, I agree. Thanks, Sarah. I think that, yeah, we do have noise condition. You know, this is admittedly sort of, you know, a different scale and nature to, you know, the strategic warehousing that we've got on DHL next door. There is a difference in terms of proximity of neighbouring dwellings, so, as Tate said, I think we've probably got it on noise condition now.
And just the last point, specific condition on the DHL scheme relates to impacts on bats and great crested newts. Which have been brought forward through the ecological survey work that's been undertaken on this site. Anything to add on that as well, that's it, it's up here.
I think certainly with the great crested newts, those related to the district licensing, conditions that were stipulated by nature space, to us, and therefore, you know, need to be included as part of that district licensing arrangement. In terms of bats and generally in terms of ecology, I have been through all of the conditions in detail with our ecology officer, to make sure that they're happy that everything that's in the schedule and the statement common ground is, and the section 106 with BNG, etc., to check that that is all that the council requires.
And just to add that there's a condition 21 which requires us in any way to do updated surveys for revised ecology surveys. It mentions it could be badges, but you know, we are going to do updated surveys to make sure that time of implementation everything is up to date in terms of knowledge of what ecology interests are on the site.
Thank you. Unless there's any further comments in relation to the conditions. Go to the legal agreement, please. Again, a few comments. Yes. Ones here, almost. Very minor point, schedule 1 biodiversity again, the third line of paragraph 3. Purchase pursuant to paragraph 2.2, I think, rather than 2.1.
Or just, sorry, so I missed that one. So the third paragraph, it makes reference to paragraph where units have been
Third line.
pursuant to paragraph 2 above, 2.1 above. And you're suggesting it should refer to
2.2.
um, 2.1, so 2.1 says confirming implementation of BNG mitigation site. It is the preferred solution for delivering off-site BNG. The 2.1 is for us to confirm what we're doing on or off-site. So where it references back to 2.1. Is the choice being made in 2.1? Two point two is then should you decide to do.
I think so. It's the point where it says where BNG units are to be purchased pursuant to paragraph, and that would be paragraph 2.2. Is that the way you're?
It's not hard, really.
Yeah. So it's either the completion date or where they're purchased pursuant to paragraph 2.2. So yeah, that must be that distinction.
Yeah, very minor point, just schedule 2. 1.2, the last bit, such approval not be unreasonably withheld from the chicken practice. I believe.
Sorry, so the reference here.
So paragraph 1.2 and schedule 2.
So you were sort of like,
Correcting the last bit, such approval not to be unreasonable would help with the minor draft.
Oh, because it's done the same as that, isn't it, elsewhere?
Yes, it doesn't quite read right. Schedule for strategic landscaping plan. Yeah, I was a little bit wary until paragraph 1.2 and will overlap or how it relates in terms of conditions, but perhaps clarify just for a second. Paragraph 1.4 specifically, until such time as the strategic landscaping is transferred to a management company to ensure that strategic landscaping is maintained in condition in accordance with any conditions attached to the planning commission. Looking at the conditions, there's nothing about maintenance per se. And I was wondering whether it should be is maintained in accordance with the ongoing maintenance provisions secured by the strategic landscaping plan. Because the definition for strategic landscaping plan includes timetables for delivery and ongoing maintenance provisions. At the moment, maintained in accordance with conditions that don't, from what I can see, don't specifically cover maintenance.
Yeah, on the basis that I do understand your concern about, or point about the overlap. In that the details of the strategic landscaping are coming through the planning conditions. And the intention was the management of those strategic areas is supposed to be dealt with through in section 106, what the council wanted to see happen. To a certain extent, it's really not needed that the details of the strategic landscaping are referenced in this section. More is referencing in the change of title. This is the strategic landscaping management plan should be the title of this section. And we need to submit details of the strategic landscape management to the council and then commit to managing the areas through the management code in accordance with those arrangements. So perhaps it needs a little bit of a little bit more of a rewording to achieve that. I mean, I think the big question for you, sir, is would you prefer us to take the requirement to submit again the strategic landscaping plan proposals for the strategic landscaping areas through this section 106 and duplicating what's in the conditions anyway, or are you content for them both to be in there? Because if we're going to change it, we might as well take those bits out of this bit as well.
I guess from what I've heard, I'm more concerned with the referencing back to maintenance requirements through the condition. I don't necessarily overly concerned with some sort of overlap in terms of the actual details.
Okay. So in which case we just really need to change or change this to include the appropriate reference to the landscape management plan being also including details of management. Yeah.
My council's perspective.
No, I think generally in agreement.
Yeah, could you just, sorry. I think it's just at the outset, you were suggesting some sort of broad wording. Could you just repeat that so that we can note it down? That's okay.
It relates to the second line of paragraph 1.4.
Yeah.
Ensure that strategic landscaping is maintained in accordance with the ongoing maintenance provisions secured by the strategic landscaping plan.
Yeah, because the definition of strategic landscape plan in the section 106 of the plan detail provision of the strategic landscaping on the site, including timetable programme for its implementation and ongoing maintenance provisions. So, so long as we reference that,
That's one.
yeah,
With the wary,
yeah.
going back to the thing with going. You're in mind. The schedule for, I think there's just a missing or in the second paragraph. So the second line for which they are paid to be paid or for such other purposes for the benefit of development, the parties may agree. I've got into that about right.
Agree, so I think that I know what it says.
Put your deep in thought.
No, sorry, I didn't realise you went on me. No, absolutely fine with that.
Yeah. Sorry, one final minor thing in the list of definitions, where's the BNG mitigation site? So figure 3 of the briefing note biodiversity net gain. I wondered whether just to, so there's no ambiguity as to what that document is, just to put November 2022 reference afterwards. Because when I first read it, I wasn't quite sure what document it's referring to. Perhaps a bit of clarity might help. Who knows?
So that was just in the BNG mitigation site definition,
Yeah.
at the very end, just.
Yeah. Yeah, the minor. So that's okay for you.
Yes, yeah. I mean, really, just quoting the same way as it says about being assessment.
Is there any other comments anyone wants to raise with respect to the 106?
Yeah, the issue is about timing, but just trying to get it amended and re-signed. You did take a little bit of a flyer, and the issue on the signing, council's fine. Obviously, my clients, Plantation and Alban Manor, effectively, same family companies. It's HSBC who are the bonds that we're paying, who actually aren't a landowner. They've just got charge title or charge on the property. The council were insisting that they had it. Yeah, they just got process and procedures, so we did take a flyer, and it's taken a little bit of time to get it through their system, so we need to click back through their chairman on their system. So normally we would like to try and do it in, say, 2 weeks, but we were hoping maybe we might get 3.
Any thoughts in 3 weeks? Is that raising issues from council side?
That's what I was an opinion.
Not concerned.
Not concerned, thank you, sir.
Okay. I'm happy to give 3 weeks from today.
That's helpful, thank you.
It'll be Wednesday the 25th of June. Okay. In terms of the cost reduction, is that anticipated? Is that ready for circulation?
It is, sir, and I was just wondering how you want to deal with costs. You have my submissions, have my learning friends submissions, there's a cost reduction. Happy for us to read out what would assist, also happy for you to accept them in writing, because I'm conscious that you clients are in the room, but no third parties here, we're happy for them to be submitted in writing, but it's a matter for you.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to consider it. I was going to confirm there's no further new or additions to the original cost applications.
No, because they were served on my learned friend, she had the opportunity to consider those and respond quite properly, and these are just our response, so we're happy either way.
Yeah, just checking the nothing emanated from this event. Yeah.
No,
I haven't obviously seen the rebuttal yet, so I'd like to read that, just in case there's anything that I need to say, I'm sure it won't be anything, but I haven't seen it, that's the.
Okay, I'll give you appropriate time to check before I close it.
I think that's sensible in any, obviously, I think fair point, also, so just in case you have any questions on me, noting of course is our final right of reply, but.
So, thank you, so just so that I'm clear, there's going to be an exchange in writing of the rebuttal, I'll read it.
Yeah.
And, if there's nothing to say, there's nothing to say, if there is, I'll say what I have to say,
Yeah.
and, we can respond.
Yes. Yeah, you want us
Well,
to,
If we want-
Sorry, I mean, just
7 minute break.
so I'm sorry, just so I'm clear, obviously this is our final right of reply. So I'd only be anticipating my learned friend was saying anything in response to this, if she thought that there was something improper, essentially, yes, and I think that's what she was saying, which is fine. So I think if we circulate it, so perhaps it would be a good opportunity for a break.
Yeah.
You can read it, my learned friend can read it, we can come back, if you have any questions, my learned friend feels something burning that she needs to comment, otherwise we're happy for you to take that in writing.
okay, yeah, pretty great. Yeah, should we, 10 minutes, is that reasonable? So we'll reconvene at 5 past. We'll see the document right now. Thank you. Yes. I need 8. And you.
Well, not the roads, yeah. Well, we just leave that down. Oh, there's nothing else. We need that much in here. So it's a union, yeah. Oh, you're right. I'm just, I remember when we put it down. That's like, sorry. London, sorry, it's just how you. Yeah, but it's morning. Okay, that's like, what's it like, day? Yeah, that's it, it's Saturday. Yeah. Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, no, I know that. Actually, yesterday was terrible. I hit the queue at the top of the hill.
Yeah.
Had to come all the way down yesterday. I don't know further away.
It's amazing. It's so super.
On their original.
Yeah.
No, it's, sorry.
Welcome back. Thanks for confirming what you think to add.
Thank you very much, sir. I mean, this is certainly a much longer rebuttal than one would expect, because the application's made, I've responded, and normally quite a short reply back. It does go into quite a lot of detail, but on reflection, I've had a chance to look at it. So I don't have anything further to add. I think I've made my broad points in the response, and I'm satisfied with that.
Yep. One other point I was just going to confirm or clarify on is site visit, which I undertook the day before the inquiry opened. So the thorough site visit covered a comprehensive itinerary. I'm content that I saw everything that I needed to, and that something had been raised during the event that would necessitate a further visit. So I'm going to proceed on that basis, seeing that it's agreement from the parties with us.
Yes, I'm very happy with that.
Yes, sir, I have.
Is there anything else anyone wish to raise before I move to close the event?
No, these are not from us, thank you.
No, thank you, sir.
Well, thank you all for your contributions and the inquiry is now closed.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, no, it's the, yeah. You can see, you like, it's landscape.
Nice to meet you in person. Thanks for your help.
You've got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Next step. Yeah, no,
Balancing the reception rate that you had, that's how the VAT then makes to it.
Yes, I'm just doing the track changes now, so I'll send it to Victoria, but let me put all over. Just copies in here, we've got, kids. A previous one. Right, we started, okay. Okay, so if I've not sent you the. So it's the details. Well, I'll send you this, change version, yeah, part through you here. You want to send a look at it. And so you can start changing from there. I'll send it across the very last one, and then I'll send it to Victoria and if you, yeah, make it please roll. Yeah, brilliant.
Hopefully that's the end. We can get on with our end.
So I've got these